So when you hear the word ignorant, what comes to mind? Probably someone who just doesn't know the facts, right? Well, in the Quran, it's something way, way deeper. It's a whole state of being that has literally shaped history. And today, we're going to unpack exactly what that means. All right, here's our game plan. First, we're going to move past the simple dictionary definition of ignorance. Then, we'll get into the anatomy of this state, which is called jahiliya. After that, we'll look at its complete opposite, knowledge, as a form of divine light. We'll explore why this is seen as a timeless human struggle, not just ancient history. And finally, we'll walk through the path the Quran lays out to move from that darkness into light. So let's just pause on this for a second. When you think of that word ignorant, are you thinking about someone's education level? Or maybe just a gap in their knowledge about a certain topic? The Quran challenges us to look at this from a totally different angle. See, this is where it gets really interesting. This concept has nothing to do with how smart you are, your IQ, or your GPA. It's about an entire moral and spiritual condition, a worldview that emerges when divine guidance is out of the picture. So, to really get a grip on this state of being, we've got to start with the specific Arabic term the Quran uses to describe it. And that term is jahiliyyah. Now, if you just translate it literally, yeah, it means ignorance. But in the Quran, its meaning is vast. It's not about an empty spot in your brain. It's about a society, a culture, in a state of moral and spiritual chaos. And here's a really key point. This word, jahiliyyah, is kind of doing double duty. On one hand, it refers to a specific time and place, the condition of Arabia before the arrival of Islam, but it also describes a timeless, universal human condition. It's what can happen to any society at any time when it turns away from divine guidance. Okay, so if this jahiliyyah is a state of being, what does it actually look like? What are the telltale signs? Well, the sources break it down into a few core characteristics. At the very heart of it all, the absolute core, is what's called theological ignorance. And no, this isn't about, complex doctrines or failing a theology exam. It's something much more fundamental. It's a profound failure to recognize the oneness and sovereignty of God. This verse gives us a perfect snapshot of what that looks like in practice. It's describing people who actually believe in God, in Allah, but then they set up these intermediaries, these other beings they think will get them closer to God. This act of associating partners with God is the ultimate expression of this spiritual ignorance. Now, you can think of that theological error as the root of a tree, and from that root, a whole system of moral and behavioral ignorance starts to grow. A flawed view of God, the Quran argues, will always lead to a flawed way of living. And this leads to some major social problems. The sources point out three big ones. First, this intense, blind tribalism and arrogance, where your loyalty to your clan matters more than what's right. Second, what's called zulm, which is injustice and oppression, especially against the vulnerable. And third, a society driven by hawa, just unchecked passions and whims with no moral compass to guide them. And the last piece of the puzzle is intellectual ignorance. But again, and this is so important, we're not talking about a lack of brain power here. This is about a willful rejection of truth, choosing to just blindly follow the traditions of your ancestors, even if they're illogical or unjust. And this quote, wow, it just captures that mindset perfectly. It's the ultimate conversation stopper, right? It's someone shutting down any kind of rational argument by just saying, this is how we've always done it. It's a deep refusal to question or to seek a truth beyond what's comfortable and familiar. Okay, so if jahiliyyah is this complex problem, this state of darkness, then what's the solution? What does the Quran offer as the cure? The antidote is a concept called ilm. And just like jahiliyyah, the simple translation, knowledge, doesn't even begin to cover it. We're not talking about knowledge you get from a textbook. In this context, ilm is specifically divinely revealed knowledge. It's described as a pure light from God, something that has the power to just completely scatter the darkness of jahiliyyah. And when you put these two concepts side by side, the contrast is just, wow. It's night and day, literally. Jahiliyyah is darkness, ilm is light. Jahiliyyah is being driven by raw human passion, ilm is following divine guidance. And at the end of the day, it really boils down to a fundamental choice: rebellion against God's order or submission to it. This verse just beautifully captures that whole transformation. It's not just moving from one darkness to light. It's moving from many different confusing darknesses into one single clarifying light. It's framed almost like a divine rescue mission. But here's something absolutely crucial to understand. The Quran doesn't talk about Jahiliyyah like it's some ancient history lesson, a problem that got solved 1400 years ago. No, it's presented as something far more immediate and personal. It's seen as this universal human potential, almost like a default setting, that any person or any society can slip back into the moment they decide to operate without that divine framework. It's a recurring cycle, not a one-time historical event. And this verse just drives that point home so powerfully. Think about who this question is being asked to. It was the early Muslim community, the very people who had just accepted the message. It's a really stark warning that nobody is immune. That pull of the old ways, the judgment of ignorance, is always there. So if it's this constant struggle, this thing we can all potentially fall back into, is there a way out? Well, the Quran lays out a pretty clear path to climb out of that darkness and move toward enlightenment. And it's basically a three-step journey. Step 1 is revelation. You have to be open to and accept the divine guidance that's been sent. Step 2 is reflection. This means you have to actively use your own mind, your intellect, to see the signs of God all around you, breaking free from that blind following of tradition. And finally, step 3 is submission, which isn't a passive thing, but leads to a life lived with a constant awareness of God, transforming everything you do. So let's bring it all home. The big takeaway here is that Quranic ignorance, Jahiliyyah, isn't just an empty space in your head. It's an active state of rebellion against divine truth, and it leads to disorder and injustice. The antidote, ilm, is that revealed knowledge from God that's meant to restore order and bring light, justice, and peace. And this leaves us with a really fascinating question for our own time, doesn't it? I mean, we are drowning in more data, more information than any other generation in history. But from this perspective, does any of that equal true knowledge? In an age of endless information, the real challenge might be finding genuine wisdom. Definitely something to think about. Thanks for joining me.